So again, the same sort of graph, but notice that the red line for the 7, poorer water quality the higher you go, but 2-year period running from winter 06 to autumn 08. There's above the gorge, and you can see that it's highly variable. At times, that same way of measuring it has actually been below the red line. And what is particularly puzzling to me is that you see the very high reading in winter 07 and the low reading below the red line in winter 06. Now, why ever that should have varied so much from one winter to another, I have no idea. But I'm simply trying to convey to you the complexity of what is going on here. If we look at Palmerston North, which is there, you also see variation, but really most of the time it's sitting below that red line. And one thing I don't understand is that is actually lower down in the catchment than above the gorge, so why would it be better lower down in the catchment when they tend to accumulate the further you go down? But of course, one reason might be that there's a whole lot of algae above the gorge which are taking up the nutrients, so there's fewer of them when they come through to Palmerston North. I don't know. But I mean, there just seem to be an awful lot of mysteries here. So is the Manawatu, is the Manawatu really the worst river in the world, in the Western world? Roger Young, who was the Cawthron scientist who took the measurement of 107 on that occasion, he said it's actually like measuring the blood pressure of 300 people on a particular day and saying the highest reading that day is like the worst of all the people who live in the Western world. So, you know, it really was a slogan that took off. But make no mistake about it, 107 is an appallingly high measurement, and it is the sort of measurement that does kill off life, does plunge a river into ill health. So it's kind of like the dissolved oxygen can vary up and down, but of course, as I mentioned earlier, once you go beneath a certain level, you have actually killed off the things that live in the river. What can we do practically? Riparian strips, planting alongside streams. Riparian strips, there's some pictures of them, they help stop soil falling into the river, and they also they reduce sediment therefore getting in, and therefore they reduce pea getting in quite significantly. They're much better if they're fenced, because then you can keep the stock out. They're much better if you actually manage them actively and harvest almost after they've grown to a certain level, because you actually want the plants to keep actively growing because they're actually sucking up the nutrients. And the more you can keep the plants actively growing in the riparian strips, the more N will be taken up. But if you don't, you know, riparian strips, big message, much less effective for N, pretty effective for P. So again, the solubility business, the mechanism of the way the nutrients get into the water is really critical when you think about what you can practically do about it. Planting eroded hill country is another one. That again stops the loss of sediment and phosphorus. You can reduce the phosphorus loss by half doing that roughly, and there are opportunities for planting up there with the emissions trading scheme, so you get another environmental benefit there. Wetlands are very important. They are a great help with N, and remember N is the slippery one. N is the one that keeps leaking out the bottom and is hard to stop because of its great mobility, because it's so soluble, the compounds are so soluble. And natural wetlands can actually remove up to 95% of the N that flows through them and some of the P. Now, you can construct artificial wetlands, which are almost as effective as the natural ones, but they're expensive. So there really is an important message here for policymakers, and not easy to happen, but really much better not to clear wetlands than to try and, in the future, construct artificial wetlands later. So wetlands do a very good job. Livestock management. Just simply bridging stream crossings where stock cross reduces sediment, bacteria and nutrients. You're hitting all three with that. Managing stock to get them off vulnerable pasture at certain times. Now, I mentioned before that the wet winter months are really the worst, because you get animals that pug up soil and the grass isn't growing, so it's not taking up the nutrients. So good management of stock, moving them around, perhaps bringing them inside for certain periods of the day or certain times of the year into herd homes and similar things. Not talking about cubicle farming here, it's a different thing. But just moving them to less vulnerable pasture. You know, rain's coming, it's cold, is there somewhere, or even wintering them off somewhere else, and perhaps in a less vulnerable catchment. Spraying shed effluent to land at a rate that the pasture can take up the nutrients, so not doing it like the pooling that I showed on the earlier slide. And the other advantage of this is that the bacteria that are in there get killed by the sunlight. So this is a very good thing to do, but you have to do it properly. Better treatment of urban sewage or wastewater treatment, that's actually a mangery. You can kill the bacteria with ultraviolet light, but you need additional treatment if you're going to remove nutrients, and artificial wetlands are one way of doing that. I visited some in Nelson recently. But you can also spray urban effluent to land, and of course you're then recovering the nutrient value. You're treating it as a fertiliser, and that's actually Taupo, town of Taupo, what it's doing now with its scheme. Now, I just want to finish off saying, where are the worst rivers? The Ministry of the Environment is publishing league tables. The Minister's actually talking about this a bit at the moment. Those league tables, as they are based on 77 sites on rivers that are monitored by NIWA across the country. That is the best national data set that we have at the moment. There's a lot of room for improvement, and if you're interested in this area, you might want to read my latest report, which is about state of the environment reporting. So with that caveat that this is simply the best national data set that we have, I'll just run through where it looks as if the 5 worst are at the moment, which is quite interesting. That river looks beautiful. The translation of its name is actually Snoring Waters, so it must make an interesting sound. But lower down, it's really bad. That's the worst, according to the Ministry of the Environment league tables. Tarawera, Bay of Plenty, you've got a couple of pulp and paper mills there, which are very significant impacts. The local people have erected signs calling it the Black Drain. The Waiho in the Waikato is a particular situation. You can see the river along the bottom, Mount Te Araha in the background, and then the Tui mine up there with interesting heavy metals, cadmium, lead, zinc and arsenic still coming out of that, but that problem is being dealt with, which is good. Another problem inherited from the past, the Waipo and the Waikato. Here's the sediment coming in the flood. I think I had that slide earlier. That's a bad one. And here's one from the South Island, right down in the deep south. So this is a famous fishing river high up in the catchment, but downstream, after you've gone past freezing works, the Edendale Dairy Factory, which is a significant source of phosphorus, sewage from Gore, Mataura. Again, it's not good at all. So I want to finish really just summarising a few of the messages I'm trying to get across to you, and ending with a challenge for you. So how to achieve good water quality? It depends on the river or the lake, depends on the water body. Lakes are more vulnerable than rivers, some rivers are more vulnerable than others. Good water quality will be more readily achieved in some rivers than others. So do not underestimate the variation. Like generalisation, it's very difficult. It also depends on what the pollutant is. I've said the big 3, sediment, bacteria and nutrients, and the certain actions to deal with it will, you can't necessarily hit all 3 at once. Riparian planting, as I said earlier, will reduce sediment in P, but only a small effect on N. There are no silver bullets, so you have to think about what are the pollutants, where are they coming from. And then it depends on how clean you want the water. Clearly, we want Lake Taupo to be clean. We're spending a lot of money on it. I think we want the high country lakes like Tekapo to stay clean. I made a bit of a fuss about that with the high country report. And then we have to ask a sort of value question. Do we think some rivers matter more than others and some lakes matter more than others? And we really cannot avoid that question as a country, because it depends on how much you want to spend. There are costs to all of this. I would suggest that with a lot of the problem, a stitch in time may well save 9. I mean, because situation with Lake Rotorua and Lake Taupo, we didn't know, you know, historically it was happening. It's something that we've inherited largely from the past. Very expensive to try and do something about it now. So these questions are really questions for you as policymakers and legislators. So I want to leave you with that. Thank you very much.